Good afternoon. Welcome to UK Column News. It's just after 1 o'clock. It's Monday, the 28th of July, 2014. And as you can see, I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, in front of the camera. But I'm pleased to say Mike Robinson with me in the studio behind the screens and with many black boxes. We're also going to be joined straight off today by Ian Crane, who's going to be bringing us up to date with what's happening in the fracking world and some quite major announcements opening up more of the country to fracking. So before we join Ian, just a quick report on the weather. So still very hot down here in Plymouth, overcast at the moment, bit thundery, risk of some showers. Some of you have still got sunshine, and a few people have been suffering a little bit of rain and a few flash floods. So very mixed bag. Okay, let's head across to Ian Crane, who I think is in Beverly in Yorkshire.
Are you there, Ian?
I am indeed. Hi, Brian. Hi, Mike.
So the first thing we wanted to say was this general issue on fracking, because obviously all the mainstream media is covering this today. Here we've got The Independent saying that public interest will allow fracking on World Heritage sites. And really what we're looking at now is, as you've been warning since we really began the Fracking Nightmare series, that 60-70% of this country is going to be licensed for fracking.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously this is really the awareness that I've been trying to raise now for almost 2 years. And, today, unfortunately, everything that I was forecasting has basically come to fruition. And that is that another 46% of the country is effectively now up for grabs by the oil and gas industry for the exploitation specifically of unconventional hydrocarbons. It's a very different process from conventional drilling and exploitation, and one where basically the only thing that is proven is that the technology does not work in the way in which the industry claims. And what we're seeing today is the statements in the media that basically it's a climb down because national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty will be excluded. But this is really very hollow, because the much of the land that is going to be targeted is agricultural, and in fact, where I'm at right now in East Yorkshire, the two well sites here at Crawberry Hill, just outside Beverly, and then West Newton, which is about 12 miles to the east here, are in prime agricultural land. And in fact, tomorrow I will be at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, contesting Rathlin Energy's attempt to evict the castle that has been built at the entrance to the Rathlin site at Crawberry Hill. A couple of very interesting things have come out in the papers that Rathlin Energy have served us. First is that the energy company has a lease option with the farmer for 50 years. And this has absolutely shocked the local community and indeed members of the local council, because they were effectively led to believe that this was just going to be a short-term exploration, and then the land would be returned to its former natural state. Well, it's very clear that Rathlin has been somewhat disingenuous, because the documents state very clearly, and this is the lease document that Rathlin have with the farmers, that they have a 25-year option which the farmer will be obliged to grant them if they so request it, and then a further 25 years beyond that. So this is no transition industry. We're hearing phenomenal numbers mentioned, like 1.3 trillion cubic meters of gas, potential gas coming out of the Boland Shale, and this is the far eastern side of it, for the next 40-odd years. And as you guys showed on the 3rd of July, the video that I shot of the convoy coming into West Newton, and in fact, even the government's documents state that communities could expect 50-plus truck movements a day through their communities if this industry gets off the ground. So the other aspect that came out of the documents that Rathlin have served on us is the crops in the adjacent fields are being sold. They've been harvested and then sold on to the agribusiness. And in fact, Birdseye is specifically named because adjacent to both Crawberry Hill and West Newton well sites are pea fields. And the papers state categorically that these pea fields are effectively sold to Birdseye. And I know that over the last few days, the Birdseye customer care department has received a lot of emails from very concerned people in Yorkshire and beyond that they are acquiring produce from fields that are adjacent to well sites that are being fracked. So,
well, Ian, sorry, I was visiting a farm in Somerset yesterday, I think it was, and if I know where it was, and what I was told there was that he basically is a farmer, but he's also a welder. He's also a part-time mechanic, and he's repairing tractors and things like this. And we find that many of these guys are literally on their last legs. They're having to do multiple jobs just to try and keep the farm going. So you kind of understand why a farmer has signed a lease. But I mean, what is the long-term effect on that farm, on those crops? Because clearly there's a massive danger to his future, never mind the terms of this lease, which will bring him 25 or 50 years into the future. But actually the next generation of that farm is gone, right?
Well, that's absolutely correct. I mean, the sort of numbers that we are hearing bandied around in the local communities are that these farmers have received something in the region of about £300,000. And like I said, that we don't have that definitively confirmed, but these are the numbers that the communities seem to be aware of, and it does seem to be consistent. But whilst obviously I understand that the farmers are struggling, but nonetheless, if we look at the impact, and I mean, this is what I've been encouraging people to do now over the past couple of years, not to take anything I say at face value, because I know that, for people who are coming at this for the first time, I mean, it sounds outrageous, but if they look at the evidence that is in the public domain, from the US, from Canada, and particularly from Queensland in Australia, where the industry has only had a foothold there for a little over 5 years, and some 5,500 wells have been drilled in an area the size of the UK in southern Queensland in that period. And it has caused horrendous damage and devastation, in fact, to the not just the soil, but also to the water supply, and has had significant negative health impacts. And in fact, people who have watched episodes 2 and 18 of Fracking Nightmare may recall my interviews with Brian Monk, a Queensland farmer, who on both occasions sadly broke down when he was discussing the impact that the industry had had on his farm and on the health of his family. And more recently, in Texas, we've seen the case of the Parr family, who were awarded some $3 million for the loss of their livelihood and for the impact on their health. Now, sadly, $3 million isn't going to go very far once a family gets sick in the US. But what we're starting to see, despite the oil and gas industry's efforts to conceal the magnitude of the contamination and the impact on the communities there by getting gagging orders on anyone that they are forced to pay compensation to. But more and more is coming out. This is not a novel industry. It's been around for best part of 2 decades in the US. It's been around for less than 7 years in Pennsylvania, less than 6 years in Queensland. And it would be absolutely naive of us to believe that the UK is somehow different and that we're not going to suffer in the same way as these communities in Pennsylvania and in Queensland.
Indeed. Right, well, look, there's the date and time and place for the court case tomorrow. Just, you're obviously hoping for people to come and support that, I presume?
Yeah, it would be absolutely wonderful. I mean, obviously, it is absolutely absurd that this case is being heard in London. And Rathlin Energy, of course, are trying to avoid any coverage in the local media here. So they've deliberately tried to get the case heard in London so that they can keep it as quiet as possible. They're probably hoping that we don't have the resources to be able to challenge it and that it's simply going to be rubber stamped and they're going to get their eviction. Well, we have to contest this. And unfortunately, it's not going to be possible, perhaps, for many people to come down from Hull. I mean, it's a It's quite a long way and it's quite expensive. But if there are people in the southeast of England, hopefully they will come to the royal courts and hopefully fill the public gallery in the court as well. It's imperative that the industry and the judiciary understand that this is a extremely important issue. And of course, the timing as well is perfect. Obviously, with everything that's going on in the Middle East right now, we've had the drama of the Malaysian flight. We've had the paedophile scandal starting to unfold, and now this is sort of slipped under the radar. Okay, it makes the press today, but in all probability it'll be gone tomorrow because there's more important stuff going on. This is a classic example of media manipulation and government using an opportunity to slip something in the hope that people won't actually look at it too deeply, and we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, okay. Now, obviously, because you're going to be in the court tomorrow, sadly, we won't have a Crane report and Fracking Nightmare tonight. But hopefully, we'll be able to get some reports from that case tomorrow, and we'll have that on the news again at lunchtime.
Absolutely. The case starts at 10:30 in Court 10, Rolls Building. And hopefully, yes, it will take a lunch break and it coincides with your bulletin tomorrow. I'll give you an update.
Okay, fantastic. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ian.
Thanks, Mike. And Mike, please, maybe you could mention the fracking awareness campaign, because obviously, potentially we have 40 million people who are going to be impacted by this industry. And, we're up against an industry and a government that has very, very deep pockets and significant resources. And, at the moment, we're doing this with loose change. So if anybody feels that they wish to help us, maybe they could go to frackingnightmare.com and make a donation there.
Okay, no problem. Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Ian.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, there we have it, an update from Ian Crane. Obviously, the fracking issue just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but an important point that he's raising there, which is that with an extra 40 million people coming within the fracking bracket, there is an opportunity now to really get some force at work from the public. So if you're not fully up to speed on Ian's reports on fracking, do have a look at UK column and also, of course, Ian's own site. And I'll just add, it's very interesting that Ian is also picking up on the massive manipulation of the mainstream press and media, something that we watch on a daily basis, but it's becoming so evident. With fracking, if we just take fracking, we don't want the public to know about this and the real implications, so we simply don't report it. And Mike, I think you're going to take us overseas where the media simply don't want to talk about Obama.
Well, it's certainly the media in this country don't want to talk about this, but I suppose the Huffington Post is the only mainstream-ish media outlet which has had anything to say about the passing of HCR 105 on Friday. This is House Concurrent Resolution, which was brought in, I think, at the beginning of June and was finally voted through, and requires Obama, can't really remember his name half the time, to behave himself and ask for congressional permission before attempting to bring US troops into another war. And the resolution was backed by this organisation, Win Without War, which is a pressure group made up of a host of organisations that you generally wouldn't expect to see working together, but they're working together on this issue, and we're starting to see this type of thing happening quite a lot more. It was introduced by Jim McGovern, Walter Jones and Barbara Lee. They had this to say. Today, the House of Representatives made clear that they stand with the American public who do not want to go back to war in Iraq. By passing Resolution 105 overwhelmingly, the House has sent a strong message to President Obama that there is no authorization for any escalation of US military involvement in Iraq. The challenges in Iraq are deeply complex, and there's simply not a way for America to bomb our way into a solution. While we continue to welcome the President's opposition to sending combat troops, we remain concerned that over 800 American military personnel are currently in harm's way in a nation increasingly embroiled in a violent sectarian conflict. After nearly 13 years of trying to solve such challenges militarily in Iraq and Afghanistan with little success, the American people simply do not support another war in the Middle East. Instead, we hope today's clear message against military escalation will encourage the President to double down on diplomatic efforts and robust humanitarian response. And of course, this is the resolution that they voted on. But there's increasing pressure on Obama, not only on that issue, but also on the issue of the immigration. And this is Representative Steve King, who's saying that he thinks the Congress will immediately begin impeachment proceedings if Obama doesn't, Obama does rather grant work permits and amnesty to millions more illegal immigrants. And that's, of course, one of the big topics that Patrick is covering in the United States at the moment. So there's that. Obamacare isn't too far behind. There's that pressure on him as well. Really, he has lost all support within the Congress at the moment, and it's not being reported in this country at all. He's pretty close to impeachment proceedings beginning. The question I have to ask, Brian, is why is the British mainstream media not covering this? Because they were chasing Clinton as hard as they could whenever he was approaching this stage in the proceedings. So the current silence is pretty deafening, isn't it?
Well, my answer to that would be at the time of Clinton, the New World Order was still forming in a visible sense, but now we can see that we must be heading towards the latter stages. We've got the trouble in Ukraine, we've got the flat-out push for the supranational state in Europe, and of course Obama is a key part of getting the North American Union in place. So I think he's being protected in a very big way. And of course, Cameron here doesn't want any trouble to be shown with the so-called British-American alliance. So that's my take on it. He's just too important. He's got to be protected. Maybe that also says that they're deeply worried by the power of the alternative media. They can't feed it with anything in the mainstream. Well, if that's the situation we're reporting on America, let's just have a look at what we can only describe as dross and fear-mongering in the British press. We could say media as well. So we've just picked up today on a tiny proportion of the articles which are sheer rubbish, more appropriate in the bathroom, as the Americans would say, than probably as reading material on our table. But here's the fear-mongering. This is the sort of stuff. Heat wave is going to kill. Well, may, of course, there's the conditional word, may kill thousands. We've got the Mirror here suggesting it's much safer to bump fists or do high fives. If you actually shake somebody's hand, well, you're in danger of picking up viruses and bugs from them. So what's the message? Fear, and also don't go near your fellow man in a physical sense, because you might get something unpleasant from their hand. And if you're thinking that you should be donating blood as a good cause, well, you should start worrying, because here you are, you're going to get hepatitis E. And this really non-article is warning about blood transfusions and the hepatitis virus. Or we could come in at this angle. So huge article in the Express about Sunita. I can't even read her name. Sorry, no, it's up on the screen. I don't know who this lady is. She's some pop star, but she's very important to the Express because she did some big gig where it was so hot she took most of her clothes off, and the Express seems to think this is worth at least a full page of utter dross. The Mirror really probably wins the biscuit, and here we are. A dog owner apparently wants £5,000 compensation after the pet dog injured its leg chasing a cat in the long grass. So she's chasing the council for failing to do their duties. Utter nonsense, ridiculous, common sense out the window. But this is all designed to occupy people's minds. And, well, if we have Prince Charles and Nick Clegg juxtaposed, the whole thing's got to be nonsense anyway. But apparently Nick Clegg is in trouble because he said how unkind it is for Prince Charles to have to wait 400 years to become king. This is the sort of stuff to keep people's minds off the real issues what Obama is doing, the potential for war in Eastern Europe. They want you to focus on this nonsense. Of course, if we buy the papers, we're buying into it. This one was a bit more tricky, and we're going to say we'd like some help from viewers and listeners because we're not quite sure what this article is about. But the basic story is a mother, Sophie Mae Dixon, 22, treats her two little girls as fashion accessories. So they get hair extensions, they get earrings, they get, I think, diamond rings. And just to make sure that they look right, they also get fake tan treatment. So here's a picture of one of the little girls being sprayed. Now, what is this about? Is this trying to encourage parents to treat their children as fashion accessories? Is this to do with sexualization of children? I don't know. So if there's anybody out there can tell me what's really going on in this Mail article, we'd love to know. As you've mentioned, Mike, immigration is an important factor in the States as America simply fails to take control of its southern borders. But of course, we've got the same thing going on in UK. We have a lying government at the moment which says that it's going to curb immigration. Well, of course, it can't while we allow the European Union to dictate to us. But at the end of the day, we've got to remember what's really going on here, and that is that all of the people who are coming into this country are actually being used. So they are being used as part of the political machinery. The aim is to destroy Britain as a nation state, but also, of course, to destroy the countries from where these people have come from, because we can certainly say in a country like Poland now, severe problems, particularly in the rural areas where so many young people have now emigrated, that farms can't run, local communities can't run. So the whole European process of moving people across borders is designed to break down nation states and to help build the European supranational state. Of course, David Cameron completely lying about this, saying he's going to do something about it. Well, he can't do anything about it whilst he still allows the European Union to dictate policy in this country. And if the borders are in a poor state, passports are having trouble as well, I think.
Well, I mean, this passport story has been rumbling on for a long time now, with people unable to get passports because of the backlog at the passport agency. They are coming out on strike now over staffing and pay, because clearly they are being intentionally under-resourced in order to, well, cause a problem. Isn't that what it's about? They're going to cause a problem and they're going to end up privatising this agency, or perhaps it'll be spun out into a mutual or something. But no doubt it'll come in some form of privatisation, because these guys just aren't able to keep up with the... they're so inefficient that they aren't able to keep up with the backlog. In fact, the point that they're making with this strike is that it's not inefficiency so much as complete lack of the necessary resources in order to do the job. Don't know how much of this has got to do with trying to restrict people's travel, or whether it's just a privatisation scam, but either way, the government doing a good job so far in meeting that target. Yeah, and I think Lynn Homer, that famous lady Lynn Homer, is now in the Treasury, but I think she was part of the border agency originally, helping to introduce utter collapse in controls. Well, we think this one is one of the most important news items to come up in recent weeks. And you may be surprised because it's to do with a cat. And the Mail very quickly made a big joke out of everything, must be feeling pretty antisocial. Cat slapped with an animal asbo for biting people and damaging property in campaign of terror. So there's the lurid headline about Rocky the cat, and Rotherham City Council said they received so many reports of antisocial behaviour by the cat that they've actually warned his owner that they'll be fined if the lady lets her cat out. The cat's cruel, the cat is dangerous. Now we're going to say, far from being a joke, this is a deadly serious event, because what we're seeing here is the clear implication that local authorities are going to be acting as social police.
So this lady was sent a letter from Rotherham, and it said, "I'm in receipt of several complaints regarding your cat, Rocky, causing alarm, distress and annoyance to other residents in the area of your property. Although I appreciate that cats do roam, I prefer if you would take steps to keep your cat Rocky from leaving the perimeter of your garden in the future. Should further complaints be received about damage done to neighbours' property by your pet, you'll be charged for the repairs." And Paul Welsh, the Housing and Communities Service Manager for Rotherham Borough Council, denied the council was being heavy-handed, saying it had a duty of care to neighbouring tenants who have made one formal complaint and numerous verbal complaints. He said, "We know it's difficult to control a cat, but basically, as part of their tenancy agreements, all pet-owning council tenants must keep any animal at their property under proper control." So what you've got here coming in under the surface of this so-called amusing situation is the fact that local authorities putting even tighter control over people in their own homes. How did communities deal with aggressive cats over the last 200 years? Presumably whole cities came to a halt because there was a moggy out of control. Perhaps a bucket of cold water might assist the situation, but no, now we're going to start putting local authority control directly onto people as part of the tenancy agreement.
So this council is seriously suggesting that this lady prevents the cat leaving the perimeter. So what is she supposed to do? Build a 40-foot wall?
Well, this is exactly what the lady's saying. It's a cat. She thinks that to keep it in the house all day is cruel. Cats are supposed to be out and about. And she's raising that very point. But the reason we've picked up on it is that we've had a very interesting conversation with a social services trained person in the last couple of weeks. And they're talking about social services as one example, being told that they will effectively be social police in the near future. And this makes sense because we can then see Britain's police force, of course, with their automatic weapons and their tasers and their CS gas, moving to a civilian paramilitary force, whereas individuals and communities are going to be policed by social services and local authorities. And of course, we've been warning, using Nottingham as an example, that there are documents already in place suggesting that local authorities will share facilities, headquarter facilities, with the police. We'll leave you to think about that one, but we believe something quite dangerous fermenting under the surface. And I think you're going to take us into the world of drugs, Mike.
Yes, once again. So this is a report from the Financial Action Task Force, and that's an intergovernmental body, and it was established in 1989. It has 36 members at present, including the UK, US, Russia and the other BRICS countries. And the FATF has released a report on the financial flows linked to the production and trafficking of Afghan opiates. And I have to say it's good to see that they finally caught up with the rest of us in understanding what's behind this. So they say drug trafficking is a business, but our understanding of this enterprise and response to it remain limited. Less than 0.5% of the total laundered funds are seized. They say that in 2011, the annual volume of the global opiate market was estimated at $68 billion US, with around 60 billion coming from Afghan opiates. And they say that terrorists profit from and are engaged in opiate trafficking. Over half the Afghan Taliban senior leadership listed under the United States Security Council Resolution 1988 are involved in drug trafficking. And they go on to say that the majority of illicit funds are moved through and possibly stored in financial centres. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, really. As the region's leading financial centre, the United Arab Emirates financial system appears to be particularly vulnerable to abuse by opiate traffickers regionally and internationally. Now, let's just remind ourselves of the last 15 years or so of Afghan opium production. And here we go. And we need to take note that when the Taliban were in government, they had almost eradicated opium production in Afghanistan. And that was I'm alleging here, that was such a massive hit to the financial markets that Blair and Bush immediately went to do something about it. And quick as a flash, the following year, production was back up again. And, banks like HSBC and others could breathe a combined sigh of relief. And of course, let's not forget that the United Arab Emirates financial system is really an offshoring of the London Wall Street banking system. So we've been talking about this for a long time. The fact that Afghan opium has been keeping the financial system afloat just about for the last several years. And let's just remind ourselves actually how important Afghanistan is to opium production. So this is global opium production, and the dark orange bars are the Afghan proportion of it. Now, British MPs would have us believe, of course, that Britain's failure to eradicate opium production, well, that it's a failure. In fact, it's not. It's a policy, which is why we continue to see statements such as this, that NATO is unwilling to do anything about it, or in fact because opium production jumps near a British base, and they're asking why. And well, it's because it's policy. Just as it was policy for the British Army to be sent out leafleting the locals a few years ago in Afghanistan to reassure them that we Brits understand that they have to make a living and that opium production is part of that. So, look, back in 2010, we published this story about Afghan MP Nazima Niazi, who told Iranian news agency FNA that foreign forces were deployed in Afghanistan and in fact were involved in the production and trafficking of opium directly. And she said at that time, as long as foreign forces are present in Afghanistan, the cultivation, production and trafficking of drugs will continue in the country. And she said that heroin production labs in Helmand, which did not exist before the US-led war in Afghanistan, are now plentiful and work overtly. And she said that she had been to visit, this is back in 2010, remember, she had been to visit Helmand province, and she said that during that trip, foreign forces pretended that they were destroying opium poppy farms. But, quote, I realised that they, in fact, destroyed some small farms whose owners were poor families who didn't have power and armed forces and had planted 1 or 2 hectares of opium poppies to make a living. So what we're really looking at is the direct support in Afghanistan of opium production by the UK and US governments through the use of troops in the country, and that money, as we've said many times, finally an official body recognising that money is being flowing through the traditional financial system, where it's being laundered and stored and is actually being used to keep the financial system afloat. So, what more can you say? Finally, it's recognised by a serious body, and although we and other journalists have been saying it for a long time.
It's in your face is the answer to it. It's absolutely in our faces that far from improving the world, we're actually doing our best to help destroy it. I realise that's not us. We're focused on the City of London and, of course, the present criminal element in Westminster.
Well, I've said this before, Brian, and might as well just mention it again. In this country, we now have farmers growing opium in the UK because the NHS struggles to get a source of opiates for morphine and other legal drugs. And yet we have the largest illicit opium production in a country that we are occupying. And you've got to ask the question, why aren't we actually buying those opium poppies from Afghanistan and using them as in the National Health Service? And I think I've just explained the reason for that.
Yeah, and we should also say, because of course we can't do anything that involves common sense, because that's too dangerous. Well, if we look at the state of the country, we can do no better than to come back onto the court case of child abuse victim Melanie Shaw. This was the lady incarcerated in Beechwood Children's Home, Nottingham, raped, abused, psychologically abused, along with many other children. It's very interesting. Police talked to us about some 92 victims, the BBC maintaining at the moment there's only 80. So the truth of the matter is, after Melanie came forward to talk about abuse of the home in 2011, some 3 years further on, Nottingham Police, Nottingham City City Council and County Council are still apparently unsure as to how many victims they're dealing with. Now, we'd like to say a very big thank you for members of the public who attended Melanie's Nottingham Crown Court hearing Friday just gone, 25th of July. These are some of the things that came out in the court case. Melanie apparently said that she'd been denied Valium and had not been permitted to see a doctor or a psychiatrist, and that she was being persecuted because she had exposed a paedophile ring. She mentioned Operation Daybreak. This is the name of Nottingham Police's so-called investigation into widespread child abuse around Beechwood and several other children's homes in the Nottingham area. She held a crucifix which hung around her neck, and she said she was also being persecuted because she was a Christian, and she said she was ashamed to be British. This is some of the other key things that came forward. When it was the turn of the prosecution to speak, the judge apparently asked about the evidence against Melanie, which apparently was still not in his possession. The judge referred to the only evidence being a finger or palm print, and pointed out that this is normally a simple matter and they must have the evidence for them to bring charges. So we're talking, of course, about the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. The prosecution made some fumbling remarks to excuse the lack of evidence, but assured the judge it would be available shortly. The prosecution had a notable smirk. So I think we're talking about the prosecution barrister here. The prosecution barrister had a notable smirk on his face at this point. He was like a schoolboy getting away with a feeble excuse for not doing some homework. We're talking about no empathy, not low empathy. So this mother is taken into court on allegations of arson, extremely serious charges, and to the utter astonishment of the public present, no evidence whatsoever is brought into court. No application is made on the basis of no evidence to get Melanie released on bail. We understand, although there's some confusion about the dates the judge mentioned, we understand that she's being held now on remand until a future date in October. And this seems to us to parallel the situation with Robert Greene, where if you try and expose child abuse rings, the aim is to get you into prison as fast as possible, preferably without a proper trial in front of a jury. We just comment on this, if I just bring the second bit up on the screen here. So we have a vulnerable sex abuse victim, Melanie Shaw. We know that she's been repeatedly moved in HM Prison Peterborough. We know that she's had normal medication withheld. This, of course, is very important to her because that medication, she has needed that medication over many years as a result of the trauma which she suffered in Beechwood Home. The prosecution produces no evidence and there's no application made for bail. And as I've just said there, she is remanded, it would appear, until October. So we'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that the huge global company running Peterborough is Sodexo. Here is the chief executive, Debbie White, looking particularly charming in that little pink outfit. And Tony Leach, managing director of Justice Services. This rather gives the impression that Sodexo hands out the justice. Well, what's happening to Melanie in Sodexo's high-quality prison? Well, this is happening. She was repeatedly moved in a disorientating way in the first 24 hours. Remember, this woman is extremely vulnerable. And remember, this is the lady that had the moral courage to blow the whistle on widespread child abuse in Beechwood Home. She's had her NHS prescribed medicines denied. She's been suffering bullying by other prisoners, and we understand that one individual in particular has been particularly vicious to Melanie. She's been strip searched on numerous occasions, and at the end of the day, this highly vulnerable lady has been locked up in a special unit with disturbed prisoners. So if you feel as concerned as we do, and you'd like to ask some polite and reasonable questions of Debbie White and her team, there in the bottom right-hand corner is the telephone number for the London office, 0207 404 0110. So if you'd like to ask any questions about the treatment, please do get in contact with Sodexo. Well, meanwhile, high-quality politicians such as Mr. Ken Clarke has said that the government should get on and focus on the important issues, the economy and public service reform, rather than worrying about immigration and Europe. But of course, he didn't just mean that, because here we are in the Independent, and what Mr. Clarke has basically said is move along, there's nothing to see, there's certainly no child abuse. And if you have a look at the Independent article, he says here, I remember these allegations being reported, but it fizzled out in 2 days. Firstly, because it was Jeffrey, this is Jeffrey Dickens, and nobody took him remotely seriously. And secondly, because he had no evidence to support any of it. It wasn't a dossier, there were a few letters. So here we have a brilliant article in the press starting to smear Tory MP Jeffrey Dickens, the man who brought those dossiers about paedophiles operating Westminster, who brought them to the public attention. Here we see the Independent working with Mr. Kenneth Clarke to smear that brave man, and of course to suggest that, well, absolute rubbish that any politicians were abusing children. So it's a bit unusual that here we've got the Independent again, but the article was that Thatcher was warned of Tory child sex parties. And this was a personal bodyguard, Barry Strevens, and he's saying in the article how he warned the Prime Minister of allegations that one of her top aides was involved in sex parties with underage boys. He was a former detective chief inspector, so presumably this man would know what he was talking about. But if there's problems with getting politicians to understand what's really happening, of course the prize must go to the Home Secretary Theresa May. She is the one on the right in that slinky little off-the-shoulder dress, and she's been bemoaning the lack of a child abuse chairperson for what she describes as a vital inquiry. Well, we took a look in her mind, and she said that nice lady Butler Schloss has created such a mess. She wimps out of the paedophile investigation, and now no one wants to do the job. Never mind the children. How will I get it all closed down and forgotten? So we don't know at the moment who's been appointed to chair the investigation into child abuse. But we can tell you, and here's the email that came into us from the Home Office today, where they said that the work of this inquiry is vital and an announcement will be made on who will take over the chairmanship and membership of the panel as soon as possible. So it's a vital inquiry, but we're only going to deal with it as soon as possible.
So basically they're hoping everybody will forget, is that it?
I think it's let it slide into the long grass. That's what they're hoping for. And of course, if we have child abuse victims who are whistleblowers, and they are simply, well, many of the public are saying that Melanie Shaw has been fitted up, that's the view of the public, in order to get her in prison so that she can be shut up, and her testimony not only about abuse, but of course she was making very, very serious allegations that children were not only abused but died in suicides in the so-called care homes, and some were also murdered. But if we're never to hear her testimony, then of course there's not going to be any problem for Nottingham City and County Council, nor indeed the government. Well, child abuse, of course, is tied in with money, which is probably appropriate. We should have a look at the banking industry.
Well, nobody should be in the slightest bit surprised about this, because obviously there's been fixing going on in the commodities markets, and particularly the precious metals markets, for so long now. But this is a lawsuit being brought against Deutsche Bank, HSBC, and the Bank of Nova Scotia for allegedly manipulating the daily benchmark price of silver. And this comes some time after the similar type of activity seen in the gold markets. Of course, in both these markets, we've got a lot of paper trading going on, so we've got a lot of fractional reserve type activity going on where there actually isn't the metal in a vault anywhere to back up a lot of the trading that's going on, and this is keeping the prices artificially suppressed. But this lawsuit is being brought by a group of traders, and we'll just have to keep an eye on that. And they're alleging that the banks established positions in both physical silver and silver derivatives prior to the public release of silver fixing results, allowing them to reap large illegitimate profits. And so it sits alongside the LIBOR scandal, the foreign exchange fixing scandal, and yet again alongside the money laundering with drugs. We have this situation where banks continue to break the law and continue to commit this type of behaviour, and nobody is ever prosecuted. Well, we got to deal with them, don't we? But hopefully, BRICS is going a certain part of the way to do that. But it's staggering just to see the system squirming over this BRICS agreement for their development bank and development fund. And this article in Prospect magazine really stood out for me because the writer George Magnus is giving away his mentality. He just cannot comprehend that a group of countries would wish to cooperate without wanting to wanting to shoehorn themselves into some kind of pan-national superstate, which would eventually merge into some kind of fascist blob. He says he finishes this article off by saying the BRICS are a motley bunch that have nothing in common except that they are large, emerging, and not the US. Economically and politically, they could not be more different when it comes to size, structure, value, and national interests. They certainly have the ability to shake the world order, but they lack the capacity and the characteristics to shape it. Well, indeed, because as surprising as it might seem to Magnus, shaping the world is not something that the BRICS countries have in mind. They are not ideological Fabian Marxists, no matter what sort of ideology they may have had in the past. They just have decided that they require the right to develop as nations without the likes of the IMF and the World Bank coming in and asset stripping them, leaving them as poor as when they started. So this guy clearly can't get his head around this idea that at this point in time they are not trying to develop themselves into a one world government, and that kind of goes against what his friends in the City of London would prefer to see.
Yeah. Lost for words. Okay, well, we know behind the scenes, of course, very powerful people controlling the world. So we just leave you on this little note, which is the Telegraph. It's saying that friends are being held together by a Queen's promise, and it's a glowing report. Well, of course, BBC Radio 4's in there on the Commonwealth. We just like to say to people, just do keep your eye on the Commonwealth. Which is the best route for world government? Is it the European Union or is it the Commonwealth? And the article's boasting of the 2 billion people in the Commonwealth, and of course they're trained and nudged by BBC propaganda. And finally, poor old Robert Greene, well, not so old of course, apologies Robert, is still there in his Warrington home under house arrest for the crime of trying to expose paedophile rings in the Scottish establishment. 67 days under house arrest in England for trying to protect children for abuse. Welcome to David Cameron's Conservative Britain. Okay, well, we're hoping to have a special report on Robert. We think this will be Thursday, so if you'd like to know more about what's really been going on in the case and what we think is happening at the moment, Thursday should be the news day for that. Okay, I'm going to say as a last note, if you can write or continue writing to Melanie, that would be excellent. Please do not send money unless you include your name and full postal address. Melanie's also told some of the people writing to her that she can receive photocopies of front pages of newspapers or articles, and she's very keen on these because she's desperately missing being able to see the news and of course the UK column news, but she can take photocopies of articles. Don't just send her the serious stuff, because she says things that make her laugh are very good for morale.
Just before we go, Brian, remember, no fracking nightmare Crane report tonight because Ian's in court tomorrow, and if you can get to that, please do so.
Okay. All right. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.